I am just really grateful that you're all here, and also grateful to have this opportunity to share some of the thoughts with you that I've been ruminating about during this time of confinement, the intersection of the rights of nature, COVID-19, and democracy. And a big thank you to the National Community Rights Network for giving us the platform for this presentation and the invitation, the opportunity to explore this topic with you, and especially to Marky for organizing all the IT and stuff, and to Hanuman for putting all the links in, and it's a whole team here, so thank you. Okay. I have to figure out how to advance this. There we go. This time of confinement for me has been a kind of incubation period for me and for a new organization called the Virginia Community Rights Network. I'm trying to get my screen so that it shows the whole thing, but it looks like some is being cut out, so sorry about that. Virginia CRN has been established to be a uniting force in the rights of nature and community. And we see that the events which have unfolded in the last 5 months since the beginning of the pandemic, and then again since the murder of George Floyd, have roots in our relationship to nature and consequently to each other. I'll be exploring that and offer you a model of our model and vision for change. To begin with, I want to offer you a definition of what I mean when I say nature that we'll use today. Nature is a unique, indivisible, self-regulating community that sustains, contains, and reproduces all beings, including humans. And so just think about that for a second and let it sink in. Nature is a unique, indivisible, self-regulating community that sustains, contains, and reproduces all beings, including humans. At the present time, though, most humans see themselves as separate from nature. And because of this view, our laws have developed in a way that gives humans, and in turn corporations, permission to exploit and destruct, extract, and pollute, treating nature as property rather than part of ourselves. Recently, I saw a presentation from a group in Australia who were talking about what would we consider sacred, and can nature be considered sacred? And they defined sacred as that which is highly valued and important, that which is unassailable, as in a sacred responsibility. The idea of sacred, meaning that which involves awe and wonder, was also brought up. Two emotions that can motivate a quest for increased connection and belongingness. All of these definitions really resonated with me, and I wanted to share them with you because we need to work with this definition in order to evoke the huge paradigm shift that's needed in order to recognize our dependence on nature, respecting our need to live in harmony with the natural world. It's imperative that humans acknowledge that we are part of nature. We are creations like other species of life that share nature gifts and depend on it for our existence. To do this means developing not only the highest societal value, but also securing the highest legal protection through the recognition of legal rights for nature itself. Nature has evolved with the right to exist, flourish, regenerate, and evolve. Laws now need to be put in place in order to protect those rights. I want to start off today by introducing you to one of my heroes, Cormac Cullen, the author of the book Wild Law. He's a lawyer from South Africa, and he's speaking at a huge conference that took place in Bolivia in 2010 about this paradigm shift. The audio on this video has a lot of background noise, And I'm imagining from the 35,000 people who are at this conference. But the feedback I've gotten from various people is that if you put your computer on 100% volume, you'll be able to hear it without a problem. And if you have earbuds or earphones, it'll be even better.
I have worked for many years as an environmental lawyer. I began to experience some difficulties in my work, and I realized that some of the problems that I was facing couldn't be solved merely by changing the laws. There were problems with the underlying philosophy beneath the laws. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Father Thomas Berry, an American priest, and I can still remember hearing him say, the legal system as a whole legitimizes and perpetuates the exploitation and destruction of Earth. And it was a shock to me, because I was one of those guys. I was a lawyer, and I thought that the law was doing good. But the problem is the law has been structured on the basis of this attitude of domination. To give you an example, in the eyes of the law, only human beings and companies are persons, are subjects capable of holding rights. So everything else in creation, fish, trees, rivers, mountains, are things, property, which may be owned but cannot hold rights. And if you think back to when we regarded certain people as properties, we called them slaves, it's very easy to see that there can never be a good, healthy relationship between a slave owner and a slave. The relationship is always one of domination and exploitation. And until we get rid of the idea that Mother Earth and all the beings that form part of her are property, and recognize that they are beings who are capable of holding rights and do have inherent rights by virtue of their existence as part of this wonderful community we call Earth, we are going to have problems. We must redress this fundamental imbalance. And I would just like to end by commenting that this metamorphosis that I'm talking about is also a personal journey. It's very hard for a lawyer who has been trained to believe that only humans and companies are subjects to suddenly look wider. To most lawyers, if you say rights for Earth, or rights for a river, or rights for a tree, it sounds crazy. Because to a lawyer, a right is something that you can go to court and enforce. But of course, we invented these laws and we can change them. And one of the most important things for us to learn, and is particularly difficult for lawyers, is to learn that there is a source of law that is not the government, it's not the law books, and it's not the courts. The planet itself is a self-ordering system. It is a system of order, and that order creates a lawfulness. It is, if you like, a kind of legal system. And we need to align our human legal systems with the fundamental legal system of which we form part. We have to start thinking like this. We have to start thinking as part of Mother Earth, so that our consciousness is always both of ourselves, but as a person, a being within a wonderful community of interrelated beings, bound together by intimacy and love. Thank you.
Talking about, he names Earth jurisprudence and says that if we follow its system to make our laws, we turn everything on its head. To this end, Earth jurisprudence seeks to catalyze a shift in law from human-centeredness to recognition of our interconnectedness with nature. It contends quite plainly that either the human community and the natural world will go forward as a single community, or we will perish. Kathleen Allen is a consultant who uses living systems to look at the way organizations function and how we can use the paradigm that nature has developed. She says that nature has 3.8 billion years of research and development, so why not use it? Earth jurisprudence promotes a number of key principles based on this research and development of nature. And one of them is the intrinsic right of nature to exist and flourish. Another key principle is the need to create governance structures that allow human societies to fit within our ecological limits, something that we're not doing very well these days. And finally, the benefits of engaging in culturally diverse governance structures, including First Nations peoples' knowledge systems. I heard some numbers at a recent webinar from the Pachamama Alliance on the day of the celebration of Indigenous people of the world. There are an estimated 476 million Indigenous people in the world across 90 countries. They speak an overwhelming majority of the world's 7,000 languages, and they represent 5,000 different cultures. Surely they have something to teach us. What Cormac is talking about when he puts his hands over his head in that short clip is taking ourselves from the inside of the circle, like it's represented on the left side of this picture, where everything serves us as a commodity, and putting ourselves in the circle as an equal. If we work from this model, the laws that evolve would look really different. We at the Virginia Community Rights Network have been working with Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, or CELDEF, over the last 3.5, 4 years. We organized 2 trainings in Buckingham County in the last few years and worked with Ben Price, the national coordinator, to write an ordinance to protect the James River. But I'll tell you about that later. When CELDEF began working as an environmental law firm 25 years ago, they realized that they were really perpetuating the very system they wanted to change. They shifted their way of looking at the law and began supporting people to help themselves. Specifically in regard to rights of nature law, in 2006, Tamaqua Borough in Pennsylvania banned the dumping of toxic sewage sludge as a violation of the rights of nature with CELDEF support. It was the first place in the world to recognize the rights of nature in law. And since 2006, dozens of communities in 10 states have enacted rights of nature laws. In 2017, CELDEF sponsored the first Rights of Nature Symposium at Tulane University. And here's a short clip from that symposium.
Nature is obviously speaking to us. I wouldn't say she is asking us to hear her. I would say rather she is demanding to be acknowledged and respected.
Nature today is suffering. Existing environmental legal systems are not able to protect nature.
What we see is a continual failure to consider anything beyond human and particularly corporate needs in the legal systems.
All of the natural world is viewed merely as a collection of resources. Human activity has become the most powerful force in nature and is now radically changing the distribution, quality, and chemistry of life on Earth.
I'm here representing nature, which has a right to exist.
The movement is emerging, which represents a fundamental paradigm change in humankind's relationship with the natural world.
It's a big idea with big potential to have a huge effect in changing the nature of legal discussion about the future of life itself.
It's time to take the first steps toward effectively protecting the planet and its resources before it is too late. Environmental laws are giving way to new legal frameworks which recognize the need to change our relationship with nature.
There's no time today to go into the entire history of the rights of nature throughout the world, but just suffice it to say that it's becoming a worldwide movement with consideration in India, Bolivia, New Zealand, Philippines, Sweden, to name a few. And once the laws are on the books, the challenge becomes living with them and learning to make decisions with nature in the mix. So how is all that connected to the pandemic that we find ourselves in right now? In an interesting article from the IBPES, or the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Diversity and Ecosystem Services, we learned that activities that cause conversion of landscapes, such as these on this slide, cause pandemics by bringing more people into contact and conflict with animals, from which 70% of emerging human diseases originate, they maintain. Urbanization and the explosive growth of global air travel, combined with the ecological devastation, enabled a harmless virus in Asian bats to bring, and I quote, untold human suffering and halt economies and societies around the world. This is the human hand in pandemic emergence, yet COVID-19 may only be the beginning. So rampant deforestation, uncontrolled expansion of agriculture, intensive farming, mining and infrastructure development, all of these contributed to the outbreak of the pandemic. Our actions, human actions, have significantly impacted more than 3/4 of the Earth's land surface, destroyed more than 85% of wetlands, and dedicated more than 1/3 of all land and almost 75% of available fresh water to crops and livestock production. The same article continues by saying, and I quote again, it may be politically expedient to relax environmental standards and prop up industries such as intensive agriculture, airlines, and fossil fuel dependent energy sectors, but doing so without requiring urgent and fundamental change essentially subsidizes the emergence of future pandemics. Kind of scary. In another article, Inger Anderson, the executive director of the UN Environment Program, writes that she sees that nature is sending us a message. And she continues by saying that failing to take care of the planet means that we're not taking care of ourselves. And we're going to put both of these citations in the link, in the chat for you to have. And finally, here's a letter from the pandemic to us. This video does a really good job of summarizing how the impact of our relationship with the earth brought us COVID-19.
Dear humankind, thank you for being a superhost. I never imagined I'd have the opportunity to jump to a species as abundant as you. Most viruses only get to know their original host animal. Many exist entirely in the humid understory of a remote rainforest. We viruses are kept in check by healthy environments with diverse and abundant wildlife. But when you rip forests apart and capture billions of animals to feed your insatiable appetite for flesh and false cures, you bring viruses like me out of our natural quarantines. You introduce us to new hosts, like you. A superhost of 8 billion individuals and counting. A walking, flying, swimming human meat market. You make up 1/3 of all mammals on Earth by weight. The animals you grow to feed yourselves outweigh all the wild mammals and birds on the planet. As you drive our natural wildlife hosts to extinction, you throw us life rafts bigger than the Titanic. Why wouldn't I jump? As sinister as I may seem, it is not in my interest to wipe out my hosts. We all need other life to thrive. So if this sickness in your bodies opens your eyes to the deeper sickness in our shared planet, it will be to all our benefit. But my big question to you is this: am I enough? If apocalyptic fires aren't enough, if vanishing glaciers aren't enough, if super hurricanes aren't enough, is the cold shadow I cast across the lives of you and your loved ones enough for you to finally confront the prospect of your own extinction? Only you, humankind, can choose to be the cure to the deeper sickness. Only you can choose to nurture the ancient oceans, forests, and grasslands that nurture you, to bring back the chorus of birds and monkeys to silent rainforests, and to make wise choices every day in what you consume and how you live. By protecting nature in all its wild and wonderful forms, you protect yourselves. As the earth stops to take a collective deep breath, you have a rare opportunity to reimagine and redefine a new future. So tell me, what future do you choose?
So, how do we get from where we are now to where we want to be? And the answer to this might be surprising. Our work with CellDef has shown us that we really don't have a fracking or a sludge or a landfill or a compressor station or a pipeline problem. What we really have is a democracy problem. We need to look at this in order to understand the depth of the challenge we have to change. How do we get from recognizing and acknowledging the rights of nature to actually making it law? It continually seems to me that recognizing and acknowledging the rights of nature is the easy part of it, but actually making it law is the real challenge. But perhaps we just want to start with private property. One strategy could be to create a rights of nature conservancy easement. This is a way for private landowners to create legally enforceable rights for nature and ecosystems through the placement of conservation easements on their own parcels of land. The Virginia Community Rights Network is presently working with 2 landowners in Buckingham County to create rights of nature easements for their property. And if you're interested in doing the same, please be in touch with us. We're going to put all of our contact information in the chat later on. Rights of nature easements build on traditional conservation easements by including provisions which recognize the rights of waterways, forests, and other ecosystems to exist, flourish, naturally evolve, and regenerate. What happens if we want to change the law on a local level and protect our immediate town, city, or county? We immediately come up against some obstacles. CellDef offers this model to help us see outside the box of allowable self-government or allowable activism and help us to actually see what we're dealing with. The first step in this process is to acknowledge the colonization of our minds and to start practicing to think outside of this box. By colonization, I mean the internalized attitude or understanding of a system of law. And usually there's a deep-seated belief that the cultural values of the colonizer are inherently superior to one's own. Often we don't even realize that our minds have been colonized. White supremacy is an example of colonization of our minds that a lot of people are coming to terms with these days. This is where the rights of nature intersects with democracy or the lack of democracy in our present system. So take a look at this box of allowable self-government. There are 4 sides to the box that prevent us from making changes we need on a local level. And looking at these 4 principles or these 4 doctrines as, well, this is just the way it is yet another example of colonization. The first side of the box on top is state preemption, and Dillon's rule can also be included in this aspect of the box. Preemption means that the state legislature can remove authority from a local community to govern or pass a local law on a particular issue. For example, in Alabama and numerous other states, state law preempts communities from enacting any law setting worker wages higher than the state minimum. So you might think, well, why can't a local community decide to increase the minimum wage set by the state? After all, it is a minimum, and we all know that the cost of living varies from city to city and from city to towns. Why can't a local community decide they don't want more poverty, they don't want to bring more poverty into the community? And the answer is preemption. Dillon's rule complements state preemption. It defines the legal relationship between the state and the municipality as that of parent to child. So in the case of setting workers' wages, the parental state slaps the municipal child's hand and tells them not to touch any decisions about setting minimum or living wages for workers in their community, higher than the state minimum. Moving to the next side of the box, the legal doctrine of nature as property. Nature is considered mere property under the law, as I mentioned before, and anyone with a title to property has the legal right to harm it. Anybody with a title to property has the legal right to take care of it too, but they have the legal right to harm it. A permit from the state legalizes harm. It permits destruction to ecosystems and harm to the community. Human and natural communities don't have title to the land, who don't have title to the land or a financial interest in the land, lack legal standing to argue in court for protection for themselves or for nature. However, the individuals or corporations that hold title of ownership or lease, for example, do have standing. Their title or lease trumps the health, safety, and welfare concerns of the community. This includes all human residents, as well as the rivers, lakes, forests, wetlands, air, water, and soil. Moving to the bottom of the box, we see corporate privilege, often referred to as corporate rights or personhood, which means that corporations claim rights to the protection of free speech, the protection of search and seizure, due process, and lost future profits, and equal protection. Now, these rights might sound very similar to the rights that we were given as citizens of the United States by the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and the 14th Amendment. Hence the name corporate personhood. In our current fixed system, these corporate rights supersede the actual rights of the collective community. And finally, we arrive to the regulatory fallacy side of the box, the fourth legal doctrine. It looks like a way out of the box, but don't follow it. We're taught to work through our regulatory agencies, such as the Environmental Protection Agency, or the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or on the state level, the Department of Environmental Quality, by attending hearings and appealing permits. That, we are told, is how we can protect our community. However, by their very definition, regulatory agencies regulate the amount of harm that takes place with the associated activity. For example, we're encouraged to come to the hearing at 7 p.m. on Thursday evening if we're opposed to, let's say, a fracking injection, opposed to our community, but really put in any kind of environmental harm that we experience. No one bothers to tell us that no matter how harmful the fracking waste is, local governments cannot ban anything permitted by the state. We present our 3-minute passionate oration about the risks to community health, but in the end, nothing we say has to be taken into account by the state when issuing the permit. The state, by law, has to create hoops for us to go through, but doesn't have to take our words into account. Many people working in the pipeline struggles in Virginia and other challenges feel they have to attend these hearings in order to get it on the record. But it's important to understand that these testimonies are probably not going to get the protections being looked for. Regulating the harm is legalizing the harm, not stopping it. The regulatory structure is designed so that if the check boxes on the application are complete, the decision is made and the permit is issued. The permitting agency is in the business to facilitate the issuance of that permit, not to protect people or ecosystems of which we are part. Thus, the idea that regulations protect us is a fallacy. By their very definition, they permit harm, or they permit harm. Also, no one measures the cumulative effect of issuing all these individual permits to pollute. In other words, if there's, let's say, a compressor station in a county and they measure the amount of pollution and find that it's okay and they permit it, and then there's a landfill in that county and they measure the amount of pollution and they permit it, nobody looks at the cumulative effects of both of those kinds of harm to the community. We're taught that our best option is to regulate so many parts per million and get acceptable levels of poison in our water or our air or our soil, right? But why not no poison at all? You might argue, but doesn't zoning let up harms? Well, not really. In the case of the environment, zoning allows the powers that be in most cases to decide where the industrial damage can occur. In other words, they get to choose which part of the community they want sacrificed to the harmful corporate activities. When I was first introduced to this model, it actually hurt my brain to think this way. But when I was able to accept it, it really began to hurt my heart. We really have a lot of work to do. CELDF introduced us.
Is it possible that we've misunderstood the very nature of the problem that we face? That a system...
CELDF introduced us to the idea of community bills of rights as a way of thinking outside the box. This type of legislation returns the right of local decision-making to local people, and it can protect our environment, giving rights to nature and a right to a healthy climate. Here's a video about this type of legislation and the organizations that support its development. The two people who are presenting in this video are no longer with CELDF, but what they say still reflects the organization and the truth about community rights networks. Oops. Sorry about that.
Is it possible that we've misunderstood the very nature of the problem that we face? That a system premised on legal rights for corporations and the treatment of nature as property could ever have the flexibility to transition to a different system?
Over a decade ago, people in mostly rural communities across the United States began talking about the need to change the system under which they live.
They began to take over their own municipal governments, to pass local laws known as community bills of rights. Those local bills of rights are the first in the nation, indeed the world, to recognize legally binding rights of nature.
It is that growing body of people who have now joined together community by community in Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire to create statewide organizations known as community rights networks.
Today, in places like Nepal, environmental groups and indigenous peoples are beginning to recognize that conventional environmental laws, like legalized oil drilling and coal burning, are never going to stop the Himalayan glaciers from melting and never going to stop climate change. They're advancing a right to climate constitutional amendment, which recognizes that people and nature possess a right to a healthy climate and that the climate itself has a right to be healthy and free from human-caused global warming pollution. The people in the community rights movement have already made their choice. It's time to join them. Thank you.
We know that this is not a magic bullet and that it's going to take a long time to break the fixed system that we're in. Virginia Community Rights Network has recently been invited to join the National Community Rights Network that's referenced in that video and begin this work with local communities in Virginia. If any of you are moved to think outside the box with us, please be in touch. And our address and all the contact information will be in the chat box. There's a lot more to share with you about Virginia Community Rights Network, but no time really now to do that, but we're going to open it to questions at the end, and hopefully there'll be some responses. So save your questions until then. What really gives us the right to have the audacity, though, to go outside the box and say that we have the right to local self-government? Well, if we look at the Constitution of Virginia, we see in Article 1, Section 2, that all power is vested in and derived from the people, and that magistrates or elected officials are their trustees and servants, our trustees and servants. And in Article 1, Section 3, we see that government is instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of people, nation, and community. And that whenever a government shall be found inadequate or contrary, a majority of the community has a right to reform, alter, or abolish it. You can begin to see that there's a disconnect between the rights that are given to us in our state constitution and the box of allowable self-government that's bound by preemption, nature as property, corporate personhood, and regulatory fallacy. Again, we know this process of writing and passing communities of rights won't happen overnight, and it won't happen or change the system overnight. Entities in power will not give up power that easily. But the system is fixed, and we really need to acknowledge that. The system is, and we need to break it, and we have to start somewhere. Here's one more offering about the system change that is needed in this environmental poker match that we're in. I'm hearing a lot about systemic change these days in terms of social justice and a just transition. And it all starts with the environment and permeates into other areas of life.
A lot of us have been force-fed an idea about what this country is and what it stands for since we were in grade school, about freedom, about justice, about democracy, about rule of law.
Think about uncivilized it is to destroy entire forests, or to poison waterways, or to poison the air, or to, have economic systems that force people to live in squalor. I mean, that's civilized. That's a first world nation.
How much can we exploit? Not just from nature, but how much can we exploit from the people too?
We have a system of law that basically privileges a small number of people at the expense of the majority.
The existing system has really been devised to do the damage that it's been doing.
That all ties in with wealth and privilege and ownership and the production of more.
It's a big poker match that we've been playing. It will collapse. It is collapsing.
The system isn't broke. The system's fixed. It's fixed to work this way. It's working perfectly for the people who put it in place. And we the people have to break it. And we have to create something new and better.
It's no longer about saying that we should slow down the rate of harm or reduce the rate of harm. It's about saying we need to stop it. We just need to stop.
They're called regulatory agencies for a reason. They regulate harm.
The rules as they stand today have been really scripted for the economic powers.
And we're seeing the effects of it in nature, and yet the response is, well, let's mitigate the harm.
Most environmental activism over the past 30 or 40 years has been about trying to appeal to those regulatory agencies on the assumption that they're making decisions based on the protection of the environment.
And what makes this work different is people have decided to ask themselves a very different question, which is, what do we need? What do we deserve?
Having open conversations about what's happening and who is actually making decisions about the things that are happening where you live. And if it's not you, how is that going to change?
We have to undo that structure and build a new structure in place, and one really based on rights. The rights of the community, the rights of people, the rights of nature.
The Legal Defense Fund is an organization, and we work with communities to try to, make sure that they're the ones that determine the future of their community.
So if there's needs within the community, then the community would come together, have a discussion around that, and draft laws and adopt them and enforce them.
It's actually about people confronting their own conceptions of themselves and their own conceptions of the place where they live and the country that they live in.
And that may mean stepping outside the box. It will mean stepping outside the box.
I mean, when you talk about, let's say, banning fossil fuel extraction, if one community can stop that and then it moves to another community, the big picture is that all those communities around the state doing that does make an impact.
There's real progress being made, and I think that's the exciting thing about the work that we've been doing.
And that's how every single movement for change to expand rights in this country has ever happened.
Communities we work with now see the locus of authority. They see where the authority comes from as being rooted in the community itself, the people that live there.
It's about building real true sustainability, not just to sustain, but hopefully to thrive.
If they choose to exercise that power and they want to stand up and assert their rights, we will be here to accompany them on that journey and that path, and we will walk with them on that and stand with them and support them.
The over 200 communities nationwide have written community bills of rights with the help of CELDEF to give themselves the right to create local solutions and drive it into local laws, because that's what's necessary to create local solutions that meet the needs of those most affected. The Virginia Community Rights Network's been created to support local communities on the ground in Virginia to identify their needs and concerns and help with the educational process of other local residents. We're partnered with CELDEF and can call them in if needed in order to write the ordinances that local people need in their communities. I wanted to give you an example of one Bill of Rights, and the Lake Erie Bill of Rights is a good one. It was the first ecosystem to be given its rights in the United States, and it was written as a result of the water supply in Toledo, Ohio, being shut down because of algae growth. The law was passed in February of 2019, and it captured the hearts and minds of people around the world. From the United Nations, where Toledo residents were invited to speak on Earth Day, to The Daily Show, which aired a segment on Libor in May of 2019, to the popular game show Jeopardy, which included Libor as a clue, the rights of nature began to enter the consciousness of the broader population. Over 10,000 people voted for Libor, and yet one agricultural corporation that wasn't even from Toledo, joined by the state attorney general, sued to overturn the democratically passed law. One judge had the power to overturn it. The law was overturned about a year after it was put on the books in February of 2020. In the beginning, the city of Toledo was going to contest that decision, but has recently withdrawn from that fight with the advent of COVID. It sparked a switch in people's brains globally. The rights of nature was argued in US federal court for almost 2 hours. Tish O'Dell, the CELDEF organizer in Ohio, reports that communities have been calling from all over the country and the world, asking for guidance on how to make this real. This is a major victory. Libor remains an example of pushing back on the system and seeing even more clearly how the system and the power that corporations have to silence the voice of local people. Here in Buckingham County, we wrote an ordinance called the James River Natural Community Bill of Rights. After writing the ordinance, we were faced with the closed doors of our Board of Supervisors who had approved the compressor station, changing zoning rules to accommodate it. They were enticed by the revenue and jobs they were told it would supply, placing profit and gain over the health and safety of their constituents. We've learned that there's really no remedy under our current structure of law. I see the outbreak of COVID-19 as an example of what happens when decisions are made without the health of local people front and center. I'm referring here to the underlying cause of the outbreak that I talked about earlier, the devastation of so much of the Earth's land surface. Yes, once the pandemic started, decisions were made with the health and safety of people front and center for a time. We changed everything on a dime overnight without preparation. There was political will to do that, and we witnessed the possibility. Wouldn't it have been so different if we had planned for a change this big and this necessary, the change that is needed for the other pandemic we're experiencing, the climate emergency? We recognize that we cannot rely on state legislators and courts to provide the vision that we have for the future. It was an epiphany for us to come to understand that we don't just have a pipeline problem, we have a democracy problem. It became clear to us that we needed to find open doors in communities with elected officials who might be willing to work at changing the system. So again, this is an open invitation to all of you to work with us to move our state in alignment with the living system of nature, fueled by the sun, regenerative, no waste, adaptable, flexible, and diverse. The Climate Mobilization is a group that's working to compel governments in the United States and throughout the world to declare climate emergency, adopting an emergency response to climate change and the broader ecological crisis. And their model is ban it, plan it, and expand it. In November, it was curious to me because in November of 2019, I was looking up some numbers with them, and November of 2019 was the last time I gave a climate presentation. And back then, 8 months ago, the Climate Mobilization had 23 countries that had signed a climate emergency declaration, and that represented 289 million people at that time. Today, 8 months later, there are 30 countries that have signed a climate emergency declaration, and it represents over 831 million people. 35 million of those are people in the United States, which represents almost 11% of the US population. The motto of the Climate Mobilization is that the best treatment for climate despair is climate action. So what action do we want to take? And once a climate emergency is declared, or any local action for that matter, the real work of change begins to unfold. I have one final gift from you from nature. This video has been floating around for years, and I love to be reminded and to give nature the last word.
Some call me nature. Others call me Mother Nature. I've been here for over 4.5 billion years. 22,500 times longer than you. I don't really need people, but people need me. Yes, your future depends on me. When I thrive, you thrive. When I falter, you falter. Or worse. But I've been here for eons. I am prepared to evolve. Are you?
To close, I have a prayer of sorts, or a set of intentions that I found recently for us to think about that I'd like to share with you. These pictures are of animals that came out of hiding during the beginning of the pandemic. And originally I thought I would share a poem with you about this phenomenon that I also found. But I decided to share these intentions, or this wish list, with you instead. The poem, by the way, about these animals is on our website, and we'll put a link in the chat so that you can find it and read it yourself. But here's the wish list. May all places be held sacred. May all beings be cherished. May all injustices of oppression, devaluation, and commodification be fully righted, remedied, and healed. May those captured by hatred be freed to the love that is a birthright. May all bound by fear be released to the safety of understanding. May all weighed down by grief be given over to the joy of being. May we all find the joy and energy to act in wise response in defense of our world and all the creatures in it. May all wounds to forests, rivers, deserts, and oceans, and all wounds to earth be restored to bountiful health. May all of us whose dignity and safety are secured by political conditions find the courage to act on the understanding of radical interdependence. May all beings everywhere delight in whale song, bird song, blue sky, and green water. May all beings abide in peace and well-being, awaken and be free. Thank you for your kind attention. We stay in touch through a newsletter, so be on the lookout for that. We hope to include a recording of this session in it with the video links. So please make sure we have your contact information. We're looking forward to working together with residents throughout Virginia to bring this kind of protection to the Commonwealth. But we can't do it without you. So if you know, and if you're interested or you know anybody who's interested, please be in touch.